Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew, author of such novels as Touch Your Nose and Jacoby Street, and founder of Engine Books. Let's see what we have today. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Write Project podcast. This is a very special episode. I know I say that they are all special, but this one really is. We have Dr. Richard Elcock on the line. He is the author of Homecoming, one of the short stories featured in Us Now, which is just released from Breakwater Books, edited by Lisa Moore, with stories by the Quilted Collective. Thank you for joining me, Richard.
Matthew, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to join you this afternoon.
No, absolutely. Okay, so I've read all the stories. I've read yours just a few minutes before coming in here. I love Homecoming. It's definitely one of my favorites from the collection.
Well, thank you very much.
And there's a lot of competition for that. I really like Sue's as well, Across Ocean.
Beautiful
And
pieces.
yeah, no,
Absolutely.
everyone's, and the Water Buffalo Boys was really interesting as well.
Absolutely.
Fun stuff. That one was a bit of a journey. But anyway, tell me about Homecoming in your words. What was the process of finding it and just the writing of it?
Absolutely. So certainly kind of when our Quilted Collective kind of came together in the fall of 2019, certainly the lead up to the work that you guys have in front of you in the form of Us Now, started off as kind of a series of writing sessions that we had with Newfoundland author Lisa Moore herself. Wonderful guidance, wonderful instruction that she gave us around different forms, different types of writing. And certainly my piece, Homecoming, was kind of born out of the descriptive session that we had done kind of on description in writing as well too. And I guess in terms of memories that I felt I could kind of lean all the way into and do a good job, or at least attempt to do a good job at in terms of a descriptive piece, was perhaps reflecting on my grandmother's own interpretation or understanding of my family's return to Barbados a number of years after our initial visit as a family to the island as well. So a bit of backstory as well. My dad is from Barbados originally. My mom is from Jamaica. So certainly a lot of positive associations in terms of getting back to the islands as kids to kind of see uncles, aunts, cousins, and of course our grandparents. So essentially, Homecoming is initially the first half of the story is my grandmother's anticipation as she waits for us to arrive from the airport. The latter part of it is certainly more so my own parents' fictional understanding of my grandmother's aging, coming to grips with all of that as well too. So essentially, that is Homecoming in a nutshell. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I got that sense of, especially from the second part. Like, I find
Mm-hmm.
that when you're visiting family that you haven't seen for a long
Mm-hmm.
time, that you've
Mm-hmm.
not become estranged from, but like time happens, you tend to view them as they're in a time capsule almost. Like, you
Very much
expect
so.
time to have frozen, and then you come back and are kind of faced
Exactly.
with all those changes.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I mean, growing up as the child of immigrant parents, certainly you kind of hear the islands that they left through their eyes, but then recognizing that my parents left the Caribbean in the late 1960s. Certainly the Caribbean that we come back to now, obviously, like, half a century later, is not the same place, right? So it's kind of interesting to kind of contrast the realities that I've come back to now as I visit the islands again and again and again, with kind of this idealized retro version of those locations, kind of through my parents, the lens of their childhood, essentially. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, time makes foreign countries of everywhere, man. It's
Absolutely.
insane.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I really like it makes sense that it came apart from a description standpoint, because it was very
Hmm.
interesting to see, like,
Hmm.
the different descriptions used, like from
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
grandmother's point of view, and the
Hmm.
description of all her feelings and stuff like that there, and the
Yes.
waiting, but
Absolutely.
also the kind of multi-layered description when they return, because you're showing, like, it's almost through contrast, you know what I mean? Like, what it's like now, and that
Yeah.
kind of tells you what it was like then, like, by
Correct.
highlighting the differences.
Correct. Absolutely. And certainly my goal was writing this and kind of leaning into the description aspect of the story I was trying to tell was hopefully to have my readers rather, kind of be able to close their eyes and almost transport themselves to St. George, Barbados on a balmy Caribbean, weekday afternoon and kind of actually kind of lean into the entire story and kind of almost visualize the anticipation, visualize the aroma of the foliage outside the door, feel the breeze coming onto your face as well. All of that stuff was kind of where I wanted to take my reader in that very brief story that I told, because certainly what I was doing as I was writing it was being there myself in my own mind's eye, right? And smelling all those aromas, seeing all of those things that I associate with the positivity of going back to the islands to see family. Absolutely. Hmm.
Yeah, no, it definitely was that kind of like transportative. Well,
Hmm.
that's not a word, but that is that even a word? Whatever. We're gonna roll with it.
I get where you're going. Yes,
Yeah, that
absolutely.
that
Uh-huh.
kind of that kind of like a transported. It's interesting though, like when you're unfamiliar with that, like because again, like just a balmy
Hmm.
day
Hmm.
there.
Hmm. Hmm.
I have no concept of what balmy feels like. Being someone who's lived most of their life in Newfoundland, and
Right.
the only place I've ever vacationed was Las
Uh-huh.
Vegas for two
Oh,
weeks.
really? Okay.
That's it. And so like it's from very, very dry heat to
Yes.
frigging Newfoundland,
Pretty
which is
much.
just cold and wet. There's no there's no I
Right.
I don't know
Right.
what balmy feels like. What do you mean hot and wet? That's
What
impossible.
what is that, right?
Yeah, you can't be hot and wet.
I tell you what, absolutely.
Yeah,
But
ridiculous.
that is it. I think definitely the positive associations that I have with the island, the stimulation of your senses when you're there is just incredible. Obviously, the beauty of the land physically, but just the feel of the heat, the sun on your skin, the balmy air, that warm moisture, the smell of the rich soil, the plants, the flowers, not to mention whatever your grandmother has on the pot in the kitchen, which is absolutely intoxicating, is also what I was trying to capture here as well. Certainly. Mhm.
Absolutely. And that's kind of
Mhm.
universal. Like I
Mhm.
was almost on the tip of my tongue to ask there because I
Mhm.
hear a lot of when I was in Memorial, like I would
Mhm.
hear a lot of professors in Newfoundland studies and stuff like that
Mhm.
talk about
Mhm.
island life and talk about
Absolutely.
but not they were speaking about basically trying to speak broadly as saying when you
Mhm.
are the type of person when you are from an island it
Mhm.
affects you in this way and I always
Right.
wondered if that was true of all islands or if that was something that
Good
they were
point.
making up. And to
Right.
some degree, what you're talking about is very universal, like
I
the
think so.
going home and your grandmother's cooking. The cooking would be
Absolutely.
different, but that's still shared experience of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would totally agree with you. When I moved to the province back in June of 2009, I can't believe it's been 12 years already. But 12 years ago when I got here, there were a number of similarities, believe it or not, that I made and associations that I made between life here in Newfoundland and the Caribbean as well, too. Just things simple, simply put, things like, recognizing family lineage based on name and location on the island, and I found that so neat that obviously that's something that's done here immediately as people meet each other, and certainly is very typical of what you would find back in the islands. People want to know your last name, which parish your family hails from, and they will
Oh,
tell you your people from front to start, like from front to back. They know exactly who you hail from, right? And I found that really cool that that was the same situation here as well. And I think that is perhaps maybe universal to island life as well. Maybe you'd agree. Mhm.
that, no, I think so, and
Mhm.
that is something that we do here. It is one of
Yeah.
the parts of my culture that I have a hard time with sometimes. It's real weird. Sometimes I'll be at a show and people will be like,
Uh-huh.
"Ladru, where's
Right.
that? Who
Right.
who do you belong to?" And I'm like,
That's it.
"Nope, what? Nobody. What are you talking about? What's going on? Where are you from? Stop asking me personal questions."
Details unnecessary.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly,
I
right?
love when a stranger asks me where I live. That's great.
Right. Super comforting, isn't it? Right?
Totally. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, admittedly, I think I'll be honest with you. I think having grown up in Toronto, when I would go back to the Caribbean and have those experiences where I may run into someone and they ask you where you're from and they're like, "Oh, okay, well this is your last name and your family's from this parish. Oh yeah, I know your uncle, your aunt, whoever." And it was almost this immediate sense of warmth and welcoming belonging, which was really really cool. I wouldn't have had experiences in Toronto where I'd walk into a random store, drop my last name and where my parents are from, and people know, the entire lineage of my family. Like it's really cool to kind of have that happen, and that sense of identity and belonging becomes so very apparent in those moments for sure.
Well,
Absolutely.
here when we're recording this,
Hmm.
it's 2021,
Yeah.
and I've just moved back home to the small Newfoundland town where I'm
Ah.
from.
Okay.
And when I moved back, this was about
Mhm.
a year ago. We were all obviously still doing the face mask thing. So and
Right.
it was in the winter. I was wearing a toque and the face
Absolutely.
mask. I
Yep.
walked into the local gas station, and
Hmm.
someone
Hmm.
said, "Matt Ledrew," and I said,
Wow.
"How do you
Wow.
know me?" And they said, "No one else wears Matt Ledrew glasses," to which I interpret as no one else in here is a hipster. Like they don't have hipsters here. They have
There we
Matt Ledrews. Like
go.
there's only
That
one.
is awesome. Therefore, it can
Yeah,
only be you, Matt Ledrew. That is
yeah.
it.
It was a weird moment. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Toronto's an interesting place. What was the? I've been there a little bit. I kind of lied earlier and said I'm only
Yes.
vacation to Toronto to Vegas,
Uh-huh.
but
Uh-huh.
a little bit
Uh-huh.
around, but not serious vacationing or anything.
Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
What was the experience coming like from Toronto to
Right.
Newfoundland?
Hmm. The experience was actually really interesting. So, although I was born in Toronto proper, North York, I'm always corrected very quickly by friends and family who actually live in Toronto proper, which they will very much so clarify for you what delineates Toronto proper. I no longer have rights, apparently, Matt, because I grew up in Mississauga. My parents moved us out there in the winter of 1989, and that's where they've kind of been ever since. So, I mean, it was a very, at the time I moved to Mississauga in the late 80s with my family, I mean, Mississauga was still very much so farmland.
Yeah.
That was pretty much what it was. And over the years, obviously, it's transformed into a kind of its own little mini metropolis as well. But that's what it was growing up. It was a great way to grow up. It was very suburban, low key, great schools, wide open spaces, a nice place to kind of come of age. So that was a really positive experience. But immediately before moving to Newfoundland, I was actually living in New York City.
Oh wow.
Absolutely. So I had been there for the better part of 2 years doing clinical work down there, and absolutely loved living in New York City. City of 12 million people, never sleeps, always something to do, meeting the most fascinating people from all over the world, the globe. And it was just such a positive experience work wise, but then even socially, what a great city to be 20 something in and explore, right? So I had actually moved here almost immediately after leaving New York. So certainly a little bit of an adjustment there. It was a different pace. And after 2 years, it's funny how quickly you acclimate to being a New Yorker, although I've been told I can't really call myself that because I did not live there for 10 years. But, you get used to a certain pace, and certainly it was kind of actually nice to scale back and just relax, chill out, and get used to the pace of life here. So that's
We
been a
had
very welcome change.
we had an author on a few weeks ago that lived in New
Mm.
York for a little while, and
Is that right?
he was talking about the weirdness of living in a place where, like, when you go into a little coffee shop and there are writers there, that
Absolutely.
it's the writers kind of thing. Where
Yes.
like whereas here we go into a shop and there's a writer there and they're only known locally.
Yes.
There it's like you go somewhere and
Correct.
local culture in New York is
Yeah.
world culture.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know what I mean? So that is very, very true. At any turn, you may see like, oh, random celebrity. There we go, and that's just kind of what it is, right? So it was really interesting to kind of live there for a couple of years. Such a cultural hotspot, and to be able to immerse myself to an extent in some of that stuff was really, really fun as well too at the time. And I'm still a big fan of the city. Love to get back, usually annually when we're not quarantining. So looking forward to resuming that and certainly travel at large, which is one of my passions once things settle down further.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
sounds like you're
Mhm.
extremely well traveled. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Make, makes my from here to St. John's and back look look pretty.
But that's all good. Vegas sounds pretty amazing as well. I've never been and I'd like to change that. So who knows, right?
I get
Right.
forced to travel. I'm a bit of a
Uh-huh.
workaholic, so
Ah,
I've been told that I have to have to travel a bit more. Yeah,
on your own terms, right?
yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Yes.
Awesome, blossom. Richard, in your opinion, what are common traps or pitfalls for aspiring authors? What are mistakes that young authors make?
Mhm. Thank you for saying young. I don't know if it still applies, but I'm going to go with it. In terms of things that we may fall into, as someone who had been away from writing for a long time before getting back into it as a member of the Quilted Collective, I would say that certainly kind of feeling that it needs to be perfect and you need to have it phrased just right before getting it onto paper maybe was one of the pitfalls I found myself falling into. It was almost hard to get ideas from my mind onto paper initially. And I think just kind of brainstorming and just letting myself go. And you can turn back later and make it pretty and make it make sense afterwards. But just getting raw ideas out there on paper can be really helpful, as opposed to thinking that every sentence needs to be gold as it moves from your fingertips to Microsoft Word, right? So yeah, that would be, I think, the caveat that would exist there. Mhm.
Yeah, no, big time. I really agree there. That
Mhm. Mhm.
the my old adage is done is better than perfect.
How
You
about
know what I
that?
mean? Yeah,
Totally
yeah,
agreed. Totally
yeah.
agreed. Mhm.
It's not an edict that I would bring over into your professional life as a medical professional.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. Like heart surgery. Yeah, done is better than perfect.
There you go. Let's just
Yeah,
get
yeah,
it done, wrapped and over with, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not
Get out
so
of here
much.
by 5.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Not so much. Yes.
Richard, if there was a magic spell that transformed your
Right.
writing life into an
Uh-huh.
animal, what animal would that be?
I've always been a big fan of big cats. My sign is Leo, and I've
And
always been a big fan. So maybe a lion, and I guess not. I'm thinking not lion in predatory mode per se, actively hunting, blood and guts dripping from the jaws. Not so much that, but more so maybe in its quiet state. A lion kind of in the shade under a tree, kind of just majestic, quiet, low key, calm and relaxed, comfortable in its own skin, and just quiet knowledge of self, just taking it all in. How about that?
what you
So I
have
would
to
go with that.
imagine is how it is most of the time.
There we go, right? So that's maybe what be my answer to that. And thanks for a question that was not very predictable at all. That was wow, that is a first, Matt.
I would
Absolutely.
like to thank you for giving an answer that was a real animal, because your other two compatriots from the Quilted Collection
Uh,
said a unicorn and a griffin.
well, look at this. Far more creative than I love these answers already. And I can't wait to hear and see why they said that as well, too. Uh,
Richard, in
yes.
your opinion, at this moment, what does literary success look like to you? And just before you answer, every author moves the goalposts. Whatever you're
Mhm,
about to say, the
mhm.
second you achieve it, you'll be like, and now that's success. So,
Right.
at
Right.
this moment, for Richard Elcock, what
Yep.
is literary success?
I think literary success for me is just being able to tell stories that I feel are authentic and resonate with my experience and that tell stories that maybe have rolled around my mind um, for a while to share them and be able to relate them to others in a way that is honest and true and speaks to experiences that I can relate to. And I think just having the opportunity to do that, even through us now, has been a remarkable experience. Being able to write creatively, to express that in and of itself is a success. Yeah, I would say just being able to tell stories that are authentic and true to what I know, therein lies a success in and of itself. Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
that's great. I love that.
All right. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you much.
And that is one
Mhm.
that you can kind of keep with you. You know what I mean? That's
Yep.
not one of those like so, a lot of the goals that people mention are very
Right.
well, I want to win this award. I'm like, that's not going to
Correct.
fill the hole. Whatever you're
Not so
trying to
much.
fill, that's not going to do
Absolutely.
it.
Right. And I think, again, as well, like for a lot of us, and I know obviously for a number of us as a part of the Quilted Collective, we do hail from racialized backgrounds. Perhaps we're immigrants ourselves or, first generation Canadians of immigrant parentage. We don't necessarily see tons of representation of our voices or our stories. And so to be able to do that, just tell it as it is in a way that makes most sense to you is a wonderful thing in and of itself. And so, yeah, as cliche as it may sound, just having the room and the space to tell your story as you know it is a wonderful thing, I think, and a success in my own mind. How
Big
about
time.
that?
Big
Mhm.
time.
Yep,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Mhm.
Richard Elcock, do you view writing as a kind of spiritual practice?
Hmm. I don't, again, I don't think I had thought about it until you put it that way, but as I kind of reflect on my own definition of spirituality and what encompasses that as I see it anyhow, I could see very much so why that the writing process would be seen that way. I know for me, similar to maybe faith-based spirituality, writing for me has absolutely been cathartic. I've written at times where I'm distraught, where I'm angry, where I'm down, where I'm optimistic, where I'm overjoyed. And I look back at those writings even years after the fact and realize that in that moment there was joy or there was healing by way of release through writing. So the ways that maybe we tap into whatever we define as the divine, absolutely, I think there can be moments where by writing, by creating, you feel more in tune with the divine or that greater whatever than you might be otherwise, right? When you're just in a zone where you're creating, you're expressing and relaying. I can totally see why one would see it that way. Yeah.
Awesome.
Hmm.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Richard Elcock, what, if anything, did you edit out of your story from Us Now?
Great question. So, admittedly, my short story is among the shorter of the shorts in the book. So there was not a lot of removing really that I did. In terms of maybe elements of the story that I might have encompassed. Or what have you, I probably would have done even more of delving into experience around the sights and taste of local food in Barbados. One of my favorite things to do when I'm on the island is to go to the fish fry in an area of the island called Oystons on Friday nights. And it's a whole like arts and culture market every Friday night, live bands, dancing, you name it, it's going on down there. Grilled, roasted fish, lobster, steak, you name it, it's going on down there. And it's just absolute bliss for the senses because you're seeing, smelling, tasting uh, just a wealth of things all at once. And it's just sensory overload in the very best of ways. And absolutely something I love to do when I'm there. So I think I probably might have incorporated a scene from Oystons on a Friday night, what that looks like, smells like, tastes like. But that was not incorporated in the piece.
That was beautiful. It gave me tingles. Oh, sounds great. Sounds great. I like it.
That is it. Can you tell I'm a little bit patriotic, right? I tell
Oh,
you what,
yeah.
that is it.
Especially
I have
about food. I can see the
passionate about that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's it. Do I have a fellow foodie in the midst, or I don't know? Yes.
You do,
Huh?
but like at the
Okay.
same time, there's a part of me. I'm a weird Newfoundlander in that I'm
Uh-huh.
very allergic to seafood and deathly allergic to
Ah.
shellfish. So I'm just
Oh.
sitting there like all of the
Ah.
smells of the lobster and stuff like that. I'm like,
Right.
oh man, I
Right.
can't go there.
Torture, torture, I tell you, absolutely. And of course, there's the great exchange that existed between the Caribbean and Newfoundland, rum for salt fish, right? Look at that, right?
Best, yeah, the best rum.
Well, thank you much. Absolutely. And we did some pretty cool things with that saltfish too. So thank you.
Awesome, great, love
Absolutely.
it.
It's so central to so much of what we cook. Absolutely. Yes. Hmm.
I didn't realize that that was an exchange. That's cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely is.
Love
Wonderful
that.
partnership right there, right?
That is an awesome partnership. Richard, have you ever read anything that made you think differently about fiction? Something that kind of turned on your light bulb of like what fiction could be?
Hmm. I would say, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about Haroon and the Sea of Stories. And I believe that we had read that back in grade 9, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that in particular was just, it was so wildly creative and so extremely different than anything I had read up until that point, and just kind of unlocked my imagination entirely. So I would say definitely I would credit that book with that particular experience for me. Mhm.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Love that. Okay. I'm going to check
Absolutely.
that one out.
Absolutely.
Richard, do
Mhm.
you ever Google yourself? And if so, are you happy with the results?
So, Historically, I would have said no, but more recently, I've become more and more curious, aka paranoid, perhaps, about what exists out there under my name. So I'm always curious. So I wouldn't say that it's something that I'm doing steadily and frequently, but every now and again, maybe annually, you're kind of just curious about what's out there and you want to take a look and see. So yeah, I'd be lying if I said I had not done that before. Is it a habit? I wouldn't say that's the case either, but I certainly have it Googled myself before. Absolutely.
Richard, does your family support your career as a writer?
Right. I guess because my primary career is not writing, but in healthcare,
I see.
I would say that certainly writing as a very, a sincere interest of mine alongside music, by the way, are things that they've always supported. And I guess I feel very, very fortunate because, like many kids of immigrant parents in general, but perhaps, I can speak from an Afro Caribbean reality. Generally, there tends to be more of a push to kind of do things like, again, law, medicine, engineering, things that, parents believe is going to lead to, obviously monetary success, more stability, whatever have you. And sometimes within an Afro Caribbean household, there's not that push towards kids engaging in the arts or, kind of pursuing more creative passions. But that was certainly not the case in my household. And I think my parents gave my sister and I tons of latitude to explore all of that and to encourage us in that direction as well, by way of private lessons or even some of the extracurriculars that we took part of growing up in our neighborhood as well too. So I feel super fortunate that way. So my creative writing is something that they've definitely enjoyed and loved and supported over the years, as they've done with my pursuits in music as well too. So that's been really, really cool. Mhm.
Awesome. That's great.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Richard Elcock, what was your favorite childhood book?
Hmm. Trying to think about kind of what led or had perhaps the made a lasting impact on me in terms of what was read. Both of my parents did a lot of reading with my sister and I before bedtime, so just a lot of positive memories, positive associations with all of that. I'm just trying to think about which story perhaps made the biggest impression. Hmm. Oh. I'm going to say Hansel and Gretel. I believe that that was one that had left a lasting impression. I don't know if the reason is as warm and fuzzy as I might want it to be. They actually read me my dad read me the original version by the Brothers Grimm, so it was
There you go.
very, yeah, not so warm and so fuzzy, but very intriguing and captivating
I
at the time
love
it was
those
read
old
to me. Right?
stories.
Yes.
I love that. I feel like in the '90s we've lost this ability to be like, man, kids, it's good to scare kids. Scare the kids. Like the Don Bluth
Exactly.
movies.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
With the oral history in the Caribbean, my dad talks a lot about when he was growing up, kind of hearing about this man in the cane, the man who resided in the cane fields. And of course, Barbados, like a lot of other Caribbean islands, have extensive cane fields. And certainly when they're, at full growth, they're super, super high. And obviously, someone could be fully standing and you would not even see them maybe a matter of feet in front of you. And there was supposedly a man who lived in the cane who, of course, came out when, Matt, at night, of course, and would take children who'd never be seen again, and perhaps their remains or bones found years later in the cane fields. And now, of course, parents were telling their kids these stories for what reason? So they would not sneak out of the home at night, right? So, in retrospect, obviously, dad can look back on it and laugh now. I can assure you, I don't think him or my uncles or aunts were laughing when they were terrified being told these stories as kids, right? So there you go. The ways that lore can be used to try to maybe hamper or prevent unwanted behavior as well too, right? Cautionary
One
tales. There
There's
you
one
go.
from Newfoundland that's
Uh-huh.
and from some part of England that's
Uh-huh.
specific to like these regions kind of thing. But I was told
Yeah.
it growing up, and everyone, my wife, everyone thought that it was just something my nan made up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found out recently it's a real like Newfoundland folklore thing
Okay.
called very similar called the
Uh,
Bread Man, who is a man that lives in the hills, and the Crust Man, and if you don't eat your crust, he'll come at you at night and take you up into the hills, and he's got a big bag of all the moldy crust that children didn't eat, and he forces you to eat them
oh
all.
wow. Okay. This is some very vivid imagery right here, Matt. That's was it enough to get you to eat those bread crusts? Is the
Oh
question?
yeah,
Oh yeah,
Hands
I would
down,
be
right?
most criminal. Although it never made sense to me because if
Uh-huh.
he does this, and Nan would get so mad at me, but I'm 6 years
Uh,
old. I'm like, but if he does this to every kid that
right, right,
doesn't eat the crust, wouldn't the
right.
bag always be empty?
Well, this is what I'm thinking,
Like
right?
if the bag is the uneaten crust, there would never be uneaten crust because he
This is a
needs
very
to
good
eat.
point. That is
Yeah,
correct. But you see, as kids, we're not even really taking it to task that way, are we? We're
yeah,
just completely digesting it as it is given it to us. We are not questioning a thing, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
it works. I'm
yeah.
telling you. Up until a certain point, it works, right? That is it. Absolutely. Yes. Oh,
Well, Richard, it has been very fun having you on the Right Project podcast.
well, the
I'll
pleasure
let
was
you
all
know.
mine, Matt.
Thank you
Yes.
very much again, and
Uh,
everyone check out Us Now. Richard and everyone else's stories in it are simply amazing. It's available almost everywhere in the province right now. It's great and it's doing well, and hopefully it continues to do well.
awesome. Thank you so very much for Matt for the wishes and for having me. I had a blast today. Thank you so much.
Very much.
Cheers.
Have yourself a great day.
You too. Take care. All the best.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.